Over the last 5 years, the instruments find me.
Right.
So I have stopped spending any time really looking for instruments. People come to me with opportunities, and then if we can take advantage of that opportunity, then the instrument joins the collection. We have to be careful. Pianos in particular take up a lot of square footage, and they're very heavy. And so you only want one if it has a particular part of the story to tell. It's actually very uncommon to find early playable instruments. They need to be restored at some level, and sometimes the restoration has to be quite extensive. So one of the skill sets that I learned, I'm an engineer by trade and practice. I started with physics and then moved into materials science and engineering. And I run research and development for a company called Abbott, which is a large medical device and pharmaceutical company in the world. And so I run the research and development for them. And during my off hours, I restore early pianos. And so I became quite good at the square pianos in particular, and then later with grand pianos and harpsichords. There are a number of American instruments, and we have an interest in adding more. So particularly in the square pianos, it's not uncommon to find American instruments back into the early 19th century and even late 18th century. Grand pianos are scarce until about 1855 because they sold so infrequently in America that there never were very many. And then those that there were often were played to death and then discarded because there was nothing much usable out of them. We've got a summer set up for a lunch and learn series, particularly bringing in young people. The school tours work very well. When I have a young artist, I tend to get a little bit younger audience. I will tell you right now that a lot of the interest in listening to early music are older people. Particularly people who first found out about it in the 1960s and 70s and kind of gravitated toward wanting to hear more of that. Yes. Well, we're now all in our 60s and 70s, as it turns out. So the next crop is coming along. It was really great here at AMIS to see so many young people, and that's the lifeblood. So if I am looking right now for somebody to replace me at this museum, because that's the only way it works. We opened in March of 2018. It's now May of 2019, and things are going very, very well indeed. This is an American piano by Steinway. It is the oldest surviving Steinway grand piano with all of its original action and everything together as it was when it was new. So this has the 1758 patented action in it. It's the only one that I know of that has survived intact. And this one has all original strings, and nothing much was ever done to it. This one is one that we're talking about, to restore or to leave as is. Restoration is going to change a little bit of history. Not a lot, but there's some original materials that have failed inside that would have to be replaced in order to make this play as it did in its day. And what I wanted to do with this exhibit was not only show people the instruments that were being used at the time, but also to kind of challenge people to understand that these instruments were being brought in, and they kind of had to be brought in, and that they were expensive, they were nice things to have, and then we would conflate that with human trafficking, essentially, with selling people At the same time, we would sell valuable things like harpsichords. So as you go through the newspapers of the time, it's very frequent that you find somebody is selling their harpsichord and also one or two of their servants. And so for us, it's to tell this whole story, not just the pretty little story about the neat little instruments that were in the South. This would have been very representative of an instrument that would have come into America. For a little harpsichord, it has a really big sound.
Yeah, it sounds, yeah.
And it's a large and it's a warm sound. So there is a keen harpsichord at Colonial Williamsburg from 1700, one that had come into the colonies, quite early. This one represents the sort of instrument that we would have had in Charleston. This particular spinet is by Jacob Kurtman. 1748. It's been in America all of its life. This particular spinet is sort of neat. It's the third oldest Kurtman that we know, and it's the oldest spinet by Kurtman that we know. So, what must such an instrument sound like? This one was made to go in an English treasure house. Each piece has to be cut out, and then each piece is hand shaded in hot sand. So you would take the little tail here.
Yes. That
tail is a piece, and it's like a serpentine piece because he's cut in and cut in and cut in.
Yeah.
This is a Kurtman single manual. As you're playing, you press a pedal and the swell opens up, and now the whole instrument produces a much louder sound, and then you can swell it back down. You can't change individual note dynamics, but you can make dynamics begin to happen within the harpsichord. All of this in response to what? It's in response to the power of the piano, which is beginning to really take hold, particularly in London, and spread out all over the world. So this one I can shift over and I can play on two strings, or I can bring this little tab up and I can shift all the way over and play on one string. How can I take piano to its ultimate, and how can I make it so soft that it almost disappears? It's a time when the softness mattered more than the loudness.
Exactly.
Now, Asian pianos are made to be extraordinarily bright in the treble and boomy in the bass because we want all the sound out of it that we can get. Well, that's an aesthetic that's fairly modern. The earlier aesthetic was to be able to coax out, the emotional response with the least amount of effort. And I think it's not only is it a wonderful thing to do, but it can only be done on a piano like this, where you can truly get a sound that is so glistening and soft. Yeah, you also got a chance to play the Broadwood, and a neat piano with a history of one of the great pianists having also played
magic.
that piano. You possibly traced over his exact key motions.
Oh my God.